The forest air was heavy, almost suffocating in its intensity. It felt as though the very atmosphere was pressing down, enveloping everything in its path. Thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, the forest floor was a mosaic of browns and greens, each step releasing a new wave of earthy scents. A light rain began to fall, each droplet adding to the symphony of nature. Mist clung to the ancient trees, wrapping them in a shroud of mystery and timelessness. The sky was a canvas of gray, mirroring the mood of the coming night. It was as if the heavens themselves were reflecting the somber mood of the forest below.
I feel no fear. I love the forest. Its vastness and mystery are a source of endless fascination for me. Its solitude is a balm to my soul. In the quiet, I find peace and clarity that the bustling world outside cannot offer. I'm an experienced hiker, confident in my ability to navigate its paths. Each trail is like an old friend, familiar and comforting.
Today he walked a familiar trail, one that had always brought him solace and a sense of connection to nature. One he had traversed many times before, each journey deepening his bond with the forest. But today, something felt different. There was an undercurrent of unease, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite place. The air was colder, the silence deeper. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The forest held its breath, waiting. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird seemed amplified, adding to the sense of anticipation that hung in the air. Shadows began to lengthen, and twilight descended upon the woods, casting an eerie glow that made the familiar path seem foreign and strange. His heart began to beat faster, a sense of foreboding creeping in. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the forest was alive and aware of his presence. Forest creatures stirred in the underbrush, their movements barely perceptible. Unseen eyes seemed to follow his every step, adding to the growing tension. He paused on the trail, looking around cautiously. The once comforting silence now felt oppressive, and the familiar path seemed to twist and turn in unfamiliar ways. Taking a deep breath, he resolved to continue. The forest had always been his sanctuary, and he would not let fear take that away from him. With determination, he pushed through the forest, each step a testament to his resolve. The forest's gloomy embrace was both a challenge and a comfort, a reminder of the delicate balance between fear and love. The rain intensified, transforming the path into a muddy stream. Dimitri's boots slipped on the slick leaves. He pulled his jacket tighter, feeling a chill that went beyond the cold rain. He checked his watch, frowning.
I should have reached the lookout point by now.
The path seemed unfamiliar, the trees looming over him like strangers. A knot of unease tightened in his gut. He pulled out his phone, hoping for a signal. Nothing. He was lost. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at the edges of his composure. He had been wandering for what felt like hours. The rain was relentless, soaking through his clothes. Despair was a weight on his chest, heavy and suffocating. Suddenly, his phone rang. He stared at it, stunned. There shouldn't be a signal here. The number was unknown. Hesitantly, he answered.
Help me, I'm lost in the forest.
The voice trailed off, leaving Dimitri in stunned silence. How was there a signal? Who was that voice? Questions swirled in Dimitri's mind, fueling his growing fear. He tried to call the number back. The call wouldn't connect. He continued walking, desperate to find a way out. But the forest seemed to press in around him, a labyrinth with no escape. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps following him.
What is that?
He stopped, holding his breath, listening. The footsteps stopped too. He was being hunted. The realization sent a jolt of terror through him. He was no longer alone in the forest. He broke into a run, his heart pounding against his ribs. The footsteps resumed, closer now, relentless. He glanced over his shoulder, but he could see nothing through the driving rain. His phone rang again, the same unknown number. He answered, his voice shaking.
Hello, who is this?
The voice that answered was his own voice, but distorted, echoing as if from a great distance.
You are not alone. He is coming for you.
The line went dead. Panic threatened to consume him. The storm raged around him, each drop of rain feeling like a needle against his skin. The wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie symphony that only added to his terror. His own voice, warning him. It echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the danger he was in. Run, it whispered. Run. and don't look back. But how? It was impossible. The forest was a labyrinth, each path looking the same as the last. He felt like he was going in circles, the trees closing in on him. Yet here it was, driving him deeper into the heart of the nightmare. The shadows seemed to move, to reach out for him, urging him to go further into the darkness. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning in his lungs, the ache in his legs. He had to escape. He couldn't let the fear paralyze him. He had to keep moving. The ache in his legs was becoming unbearable, but he couldn't stop. Not now, not when he was so close. He had to find a way out. He burst into a small clearing, hoping to see a landmark, a sign of civilization, but there was nothing. Just more trees, more shadows.
Please, let there be something. Anything. He was desperate, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of hope.
But there was only the figure, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and menacing, a silhouette against the storm. Tall, skeletal, with eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow in the fading light. It seemed to absorb the darkness around it, becoming one with the night. The figure was watching him, waiting. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was as if it was waiting for him to make the first move.
You cannot run from what you do not understand. The voice was cold, emotionless. It sent a chill down his spine, freezing him in place. He knew he had to face it, but the fear was overwhelming. He stood there, paralyzed, his mind racing. What was this figure? Why was it here? And what did it want from him? Summoning all his courage, he took a hesitant step forward. He had to confront this shadow, this embodiment of his fears. It was the only way to escape the storm, both outside and within. The air was thick with tension as he and the figure faced each other. The storm seemed to quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The figure's glowing eyes bore into him, unblinking, unwavering. He felt exposed, vulnerable, but he couldn't back down now. He clenched his fists, determination replacing fear. He would not be a victim. He would face this shadow and whatever it represented. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to speak, to demand answers. The storm may have brought him to this point, but he would decide how it ended. The rain poured down, but he no longer felt it. All that mattered was the confrontation, the resolution of this nightmare. The shadow in the storm would no longer control him.
Dmitri stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat. The forest seemed to close in around him, each tree a silent sentinel watching his every move. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the relentless drumming of the rain. He could feel the cold, wet earth beneath his feet, slippery and treacherous. The figure moved towards him, gliding effortlessly over the rough terrain. It was as if the rain and mud were no obstacle, as if the figure was part of the forest itself. Dmitri's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was it a person, an animal, or something else entirely? The figure's movements were fluid, almost ghostly, and it seemed to be getting closer with every heartbeat. There was no sound of footsteps, only the relentless drumming of the rain. He was trapped. The rain fell in heavy sheets, obscuring his vision and making it hard to breathe. Each drop felt like a tiny hammer, pounding away at his resolve. He looked around desperately, searching for a way out, but the forest was a maze of shadows and secrets. The forest pressed in on all sides, a wall of shadows and secrets. The trees seemed to whisper to each other, their branches swaying in the wind. Dmitri felt a chill run down his spine. He had never felt so alone, so vulnerable. The darkness seemed to have a life of its own, creeping closer and closer, threatening to swallow him whole. He turned to run, but his legs felt like lead. Every step was a struggle, his muscles screaming in protest. He could feel the weight of exhaustion bearing down on him, each movement a monumental effort. His breath came in ragged gasps, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. He was exhausted, his body spent. Every ounce of energy had been drained from him, leaving him weak and defenseless. He stumbled and fell, the ground rushing up to meet him. The cold, wet earth embraced him, sapping what little strength he had left. He lay there, panting, his mind a whirl of fear and confusion.
No, I can't keep going. His voice was barely a whisper, lost in the cacophony of the storm. He could feel the despair creeping in, a dark cloud that threatened to overwhelm him. He had to keep moving, had to find a way out, but his body refused to obey.
He sank to his knees, his back against a gnarled oak, the rough bark digging into his skin. The tree was ancient, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Dmitri could feel its strength, its resilience, and he drew a small measure of comfort from it. But the figure was still coming, relentless and unstoppable. His eyes fixed on the approaching figure. The rain was so heavy he could barely breathe. Each drop felt like a weight pressing down on him, adding to his sense of helplessness. The figure was closer now, its features still obscured by the rain. Dmitri's heart raced, a wild, uncontrollable beat that echoed in his ears. He closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The fear was a living thing, coiling around his heart and squeezing tight. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, the rain soaking through his clothes. He was alone, trapped in the clearing with no hope of escape. The footsteps stopped just in front of him. Dmitri opened his eyes a sliver, peering through the curtain of rain. The figure stood close now, its features obscured by the shadows and the downpour.
His phone rang one last time. He stared at the screen. It was his own number, his own face stared back at him, a ghostly image reflected in the darkness.
You found me.
The words sent a chill down his spine, colder than the rain, colder than death. He turned his head, drawn by an unseen force. Beside him, almost close enough to touch, stood the figure. Its eyes, burning like hot coals, met his. And then the world exploded in a blinding white flash. The storm raged through the night, lightning splitting the sky, thunder echoing through the valleys. But by morning the rain had stopped, the clouds had parted, and the forest stood silent once more. Search parties combed the area for days. They found Dmitri's backpack, his belongings scattered nearby. But of Dmitri himself there was no sign. He had vanished without a trace. The police were baffled. Dmitri's disappearance made no sense. There were no signs of foul play, no indication of what had happened to him. The case went cold, the mystery unsolved. The only clue, a chilling detail that sent shivers down the spines of the investigators, was the final call log on Dmitri's phone. A call to his own number, placed just moments before he disappeared. No one could explain how it had happened. No one could explain who or what had answered. The phone records showed no outgoing call, only an incoming one, a call from himself. The forest, as always, kept its secrets. The trees whispered amongst themselves, their leaves rustling in the breeze. The rain washed away any remaining trace of Dmitri's presence. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the woods, in the shadows beneath the ancient trees, something stirred, something ancient and evil, something that had been waiting for a very long time. The forest had claimed another victim, and the calls would continue, whispers in the dark, beckoning unsuspecting souls to their doom, for the forest always takes back what it claimed.